Hello Diet Soap viewers, listeners, and future readers. This Critical Cuts video is ostensibly about the Jussie Smollett trial. It's apparently about Angela Davis and Black Lives Matter, but what it's really about is how to navigate between meaning and reason. It's a difficult topic, especially when one realizes that reason and meaning are interconnected. But it's also difficult when you consider how what appears to be immediately meaningful usually derives from what is, or from the status quo. New meanings appear as problems and are confusing. This is a video about epistemology, about ideology, and about the left. And just to make things interesting and to match my mood, it will also be about the novelist B.S. Johnson. Let's start with B.S. Johnson, not with a particular book, but with his short film, A Fat Man on the Beach. In that film, the experimental novelist ruminates on his life, on art, and on filmmaking. He tells a story of a film producer he worked with, a filmmaker who had produced propaganda films in Africa. This filmmaker had been tasked with filming the long, ponderous speeches of the statesmen in Africa, and he was given the task of capturing the hours of speeches on film stock that only lasted for 10 minutes per reel. He'd film a speech for 10 minutes and then have to stop in order to load more film into the camera. In order to cover up the gaps during editing, this filmmaker would cut away to what's called B-roll, that is, to images that were not of the statesmen behind the podiums, but to often unrelated images like shots of bunches of bananas or shots of the crowds. In B.S. Johnson's film, there were similar cutaways to bunches of bananas, similar moments where obvious B-roll footage would fill the screen in order to fill in the gaps. But the gaps in Johnson's film weren't there because he'd run out of film in the camera and needed to reload, but they appeared during the moments when there was a gap in his thinking, in his storytelling, in his poetry, and his mood. Fat Man on the Beach is a film about a man who is trying to create something from the pieces of his life. It is a film made by a novelist shortly before his suicide. It is a film that, in its own way, is a bunch of bananas trying to cover up a gap. If you enjoy these videos, you should click on the subscribe button and click that bell. You should also consider supporting me on Patreon. Patrons get access to a second behind-the-scenes Parrot Room discussion where we dish out gossip or go into the weeds on topics such as the tendency of the rate of profit to decline, imperialism, and the critical theories of Tiffany Brissett and Donald Most. You'll also get access to both the public and private version of the revised Pop the Left series with Ashley Frawley and Pascal Robert, and the new Zoomer Philosophy series. Your support will not only make content like this possible, it will also help to establish a new publishing venture through Diet Soap Media. Right now, supporting me on Patreon will make a big difference. Human beings don't have direct access to the world of facts. Our experiences arrive through the medium of our sensory system. Our eyes, our ears, our mouths and tongues and nose, our skin, deliver sensations to our brains, and we then cognize them, create images and sounds, and representational abstractions in order to create a sense of continuity, a sense of place, of identity and order. The apparatus of our sense-making includes more than just our biology. It includes our cultural assumptions, our linguistic conventions, our historically determined sensibilities, and our character. Most of all, our attempts at sense-making involve deciding where to place the bunches of bananas. Just where we decide to stop, to make a cut, to paper over our deficiencies and blank spots. This determines the picture we get of events. Absolute knowledge without any gaps is not possible. However, there are methods for establishing knowledge, even if these methods are different across different domains. For example, in the legal system, there are various standards of evidence that apply in different contexts. For instance, in criminal cases, the amount of evidence required to establish guilt is very high. Whereas in civil proceedings, the standard is preponderance of evidence. That is, if there is a greater than 50% chance that a person is guilty, then a civil claim can be obtained. In the realm of politics and rhetoric, however, there are no clear or even any vague standards. On television, on YouTube, and even in books, one just gets away with what one can. Let me repeat that. There are no standards of evidence that are consistently applied to the judgments of journalists, public speakers, or even to professors or educators. The corporate media and independent media alike are not just free, but really are a free-for-all. And this is why journalistic coverage of the legal system and of trials in particular are so fraught with peril, and why procedures which should be easy enough to judge in an objective way are so often central to cultural and ideological battles. Now, what I want to consider is a response to Jussie Smollett's trial, specifically the response from Black Lives Matter, Angela Davis, and Dr. Fanya Davis to the charge of disorderly conduct and lying to the police after orchestrating a phony hate crime, wherein Smollett was the target. To begin with, let's look at some of the misstatements and logical fallacies put forward by Angela Davis and Fanya Davis during their appearance on the podcast Sway's Universe.
So it's really, in many ways, a credibility contest. We know that a hate attack occurred, and the question is, who did it and why? And Jussie says that he was attacked because of his race and because of his sexual orientation, and the police department says that he was attacked. He made this all up, that this was a hate crime hoax that he engineered with these two brothers. So the question is, who's going to be more credible at trial?
If this were true, then given the standards of evidence in a criminal trial, the jury would have had to acquit Jussie Smollett. That is, the evidence against Smollett in such a situation might have reached the level of a preponderance of evidence, the level needed for a conviction in a civil court, but it would never have reached the standard of beyond all reasonable doubt. However, Chicago police did not merely testify as witnesses in the trial, but rather presented other forms of evidence, including testimony from multiple witnesses, video camera footage, and including testimony from Smollett and his attackers themselves. The attempt to frame the trial as a he said, she said case, or frame it as a contest of credibility between Smollett and the police, is misleading.
And I want to also, I know I'm going on a little bit, but I want to talk about the political motivation here.
Okay.
Tanya, let's not forget that the current special prosecutor has defended Ivanka Trump, Jared Kushner, and other Trump associates.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
The charges were dropped by
that Trump himself explicitly denounced Jussie during his last year in office. So this is part of an effort of the conservative neo-fascist forces in this country to gain the ears of people who ought to be trying to push the country in a progressive direction.
Now, this is a combination of cherry-picking and of guilt by association. To characterize the special prosecutor as politically motivated in his pursuit of Jussie Smollett, politically motivated in support of Trump, requires us to ignore Dan Webb's involvement with the Iran-Contra case, wherein he sought charges against the then National Security Advisor John Poindexter after Poindexter lied to Congress about the scandal. And it requires us to ignore the way Webb deposed the president himself in an effort to root out corruption. More importantly, the fact that Webb, as a private attorney, defended Trump and members of Trump's family should not be held against him nor mark him as politically aligned with Trump, given that an attorney's professional obligation is to provide legal counsel and that everyone is entitled to representation. They are cherry-picking what part of Webb's bio should be used to judge his character and ignoring important principles arising out of our judicial system in order to do so. The political perspective that one must adopt in order to stigmatize an attorney based upon the character of his or her clients is reactionary. Further, to discredit an argument or claim based on the fact that someone unsavory makes the same claim or argument is a logical mistake. It is an example of guilt by association. This can be recognized as a fallacy if we take a look at it in the abstract. In the abstract, fallacy works like this. X is a Y, X has Z, therefore all Z are Y. Or in concrete terms, John is a con artist, John has black hair, therefore all people with black hair are con artists. Or as stated in the Sway's Universe podcast, one person who denounced Smollett's testimony to the police is Dan Webb. The list of people who have condemned Smollett includes Donald Trump. Therefore, everyone who condemned Smollett are the same as or are politically aligned with Donald Trump. Now, the fact that Angela and Fania Davis did a poor job of defending Smollett, or that the Black Lives Matter statement in defense of Smollett made similar errors, reducing the question of Smollett's guilt or innocence to a question of siding with the Chicago Police Department or siding with Smollett, for example, does not demonstrate that Smollett was indeed guilty. Further, even the conviction of Smollett does not absolutely demonstrate guilt. However, what we can say for sure is that neither Angela Davis nor the official Black Lives Matter statement are adequately attempting to seek truth or think through their own side. In Theodore Adorno's essay entitled Resignation, the Frankfurt School philosopher pointed out that in our world without a clear path towards truth, a pseudo-reality takes hold. When we consider the possibility that Jussie Smollett perpetrated a hoax, orchestrated a hate crime against himself, and then we allow for the fact that the arguments on his behalf by activists and respected left intellectuals were not sound but were riddled with fallacies and unjustified framing, we might allow ourselves to wonder if both Smollett and his defenders are caught in pseudo-activity and caught in its attendant reactionary ideology. To put it more clearly, when we're faced with the fact that leading activists in the struggle for the emancipation of people of color are apparently not motivated to seek a truth at least as sound as a truth produced by an admittedly corrupt or corruptible legal system, but instead operate on the level of rhetoric and naked propaganda, we should ask what purpose the brazenness of their pseudo-critique actually serves. One answer might be found by recalling that, like everything else in bourgeois society, the propaganda of Black Lives Matter and the Davis sisters is fractured. There are multiple standards for truth, for evidence, in our bourgeois system. Likewise, there are different standards and techniques when it comes to propaganda. It seems to me most useful to consider the statements of Black Lives Matter and Angela Davis as serving a function politically, but not a function that is universal. Rather, the purpose is to create both discipline and a narrative within the Democratic Party. In the fight with the Republicans, what matters is not discovering truth. What matters is not clarity and open thinking about contemporary problems, but rather the rounding up of the various demographic groups within the coalition. The truth about Davis's and Black Lives Matter's irrational insistence is that it is aimed not at liberation, but at control. Black Lives Matter and Davis, by continuing to insist they know the true narrative about Smollett, will past the point when the evidence would seem to warrant such confidence, are reinforcing an oppositional politics that is only opposed to the other side of a system that is mutually reinforcing. They only manage to create temporary moments of balance and stasis, That is, while the right can celebrate the judgment against Smollett and claim that his actions absolve us of the need to overcome a system of judgment that is indeed weighted against black people in intolerable ways, the left can insist that Smollett's fate exposes a conscious, explicitly right-wing conspiracy against black people, and thereby relieve their political allies within the Democratic Party from any responsibility excepting for the winning of votes away from the right wing of capital.